Hey guys, it's Kaylee and welcome back to Hippie in a Suit, where I talk about sustainability because I dream of a world where the richest 1% don't earn double 99% of the population. Hey there everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive in my SDG series. For those of you who are new to the channel, these videos go into detail on each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, because of the depth I go into, they tend to be pretty lengthy, but at the end, I do summarize the goal in like 2 minutes, so if you just want a super high-level overview, you can jump to that section by checking out the chapters in the description box below. And if you haven't already watched my primer on the SDGs, I do recommend checking that out first so that you understand the overall framework that each of these goals is a part of. You may have guessed by my intro that today we're zooming in on SDG 10, which aims to reduce inequality. The statistic I shared at the beginning of the video comes from Oxfam's Survival of the Richest report and shows that the top 1% of the global population has double the income of the bottom 99%. That report also includes a number of shocking statistics, including the fact that the world's billionaires' fortunes increased by 2.7 billion a day, or that Elon Musk paid a true tax rate of about 3% between 2014 and 2018. And we're gonna get into all of that in just a second, but before I do, a few announcements. As always, you'll find a link to the blog post in the description box below that includes links to all the research used in this video, resources where you can learn more about SDG 10, and a few organizations who work on this topic that you may want to choose to follow or support. Okay, without further ado, let's get into SDG 10, Reducing Inequalities. SDG 10 is made up of 7 targets and 3 means of implementation that focus on reducing inequality within and among countries by closing wealth gaps, reducing inequalities and discrimination, enhancing social protections, and ensuring sound regulation of financial markets. Now, before we dig into the targets, I want to explain one important and massive trend shift that the world has experienced when it comes to inequality. For much of the 1900s, the biggest challenge we faced when it came to inequality was the disparity between countries. In other words, that developing nations were much worse off than developed nations. However, the gap between these countries has been narrowing over the last 25 years. This isn't to say that developing countries aren't left behind, but just overall, there has been an improvement thanks to economic growth in countries like China and India. But as we saw progress between countries, a new challenge has emerged, which is inequality has grown substantially within countries, meaning among the individuals living in those individual countries. This has been particularly true since the financial crisis in 2008. Today, 71% of the world's population live in a country where inequality has grown. Or put in even more simple terms, income and wealth are increasingly concentrated at the top. An Oxfam report shows that in the 10 years since the financial crisis, the number of billionaires has doubled. In addition, the fortunes held by those billionaires just keeps getting bigger. In 2018, the 26 richest people in the world held as much wealth as the bottom half of the global population, or about 3.8 billion of the poorest people. That was down from just 43 billionaires the year before. We're going to dive into more of the specifics around this goal, but I think it's really important to remember that this is the reality of the overall trend that we see when it comes to inequality. Okay, let's get into the targets. Target 10.1. By 2030, progressively achieve and sustain income growth of the bottom 40% of the population at a rate higher than the national average. I do think that this target is pretty self-explanatory. The idea here is that to close the wealth gap, lower income people need wage growth faster than income growth of other groups. Everyone, and especially those with lower income and living in poverty, must benefit and participate in a country's broader economic growth. This is a core tenet of the Leave No One Behind principle that is fundamental to the SDGs. This target is measured by an indicator that examines the growth rates of household expenditure or income per capita among the bottom 40% of the population and the total population. Before COVID-19, there was really promising progress on this target. more than 3/5 of countries with available data saw that the bottom 40% income or household expenditures was growing more quickly than the national average, suggesting that income inequality was narrowing. However, the pandemic led to a stall and potentially even a reversal of this trend. In 2020, many countries saw declines in growth among the bottom 40% of greater magnitude than the national average. Regardless of positive or negative trends on this trajectory, in all countries with data, the bottom 40% of the population received less than 25% of overall income, while the richest 10% received at least 20% of overall income. Target 10.2. By 2030, empower and promote the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status. This target is measured by the proportion of the population living on less than half the national median income. This measurement aims to show the level of social exclusion, relative poverty, and inequality of income distribution within a country. For those of you who watched my video on SDG 1, No Poverty, you will remember that there's a difference between absolute poverty, where you set a poverty line and determine how many people live below it, and relative poverty, where poverty is measured in relation to the income of others. This target is trying to assess inclusion, so it measures how people are doing in relation to each other and not in absolute terms. So where do we stand on this one? Well, globally, 13% of the population live on less than half of the national median income. However, this average number hides wide variations between different countries and regions. For example, this number is less than 5% in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, but is around 25% in Brazil and South Africa. Latin America has the greatest proportion of people living below 50% of the national median income, and Central and Southern Asia has the smallest disparity. It may surprise some to know that Europe and North America are actually not high performers on this indicator and actually come out somewhere in the middle of the pack. Target 10.3. Ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequalities of outcome, including by eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation, policies, and action in this regard. To understand this target, there are a few terms that are important to know. Equal opportunity is the right to be treated without discrimination. Discrimination is any distinction, inclusion, restriction, preference, or other differential treatment that is directly or indirectly based on a factor that is prohibited by international human rights law, which include race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national origin, social origin, property, birth status, disability, age, nationality, marital and family status, sexual orientation, gender identity, health status, place of residence, economic and social situation, pregnancy, indigenous status, or Afro descent. And the final term is harassment, which encompasses words, gestures, or actions which tend to annoy, alarm, abuse, demean, intimidate, belittle, humiliate, or embarrass another, or to create an intimidating or hostile environment. While they generally involve a pattern of behavior, harassment can take the form of a single incident as well. This target is measured by the proportion of the adult population who self-report that they have personally experienced discrimination or harassment during the last 12 months based on grounds prohibited by international human rights law, which was that long list I just tried to read. Roughly 1 in 5 people have experienced discrimination according to data from 49 countries, which was collected between 2017 and 2021. Women are more than twice as likely as men to experience discrimination on the grounds of sex. People with disabilities experience a much higher rate of discrimination than the general population, with 1/3 reporting personal experiences of discrimination. And the last thing I want to mention on this target is that there is a big focus on policies and law within the text, and this is because policy has the potential to both reduce and exacerbate discrimination. Many countries have laws that prohibit employers from making hiring decisions on the basis of grounds prohibited under international human rights law, and this promotes a fairer approach to employee recruitment and retention. Whereas policies like the anti-gay bill recently adopted in Uganda, which can mean life in prison for those who identify as gay, propagate and exacerbate discrimination against marginalized groups. It's really just horrific. Target 10.4. adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage, and social protection policies, and progressively achieve greater equality. Okay, we're going to get a little technical on this one. This particular target is measured by two indicators that are largely considered the most credible ways of looking at inequality on a statistical level. The first one is called the labor share of GDP, and effectively it compares how much of the overall economic benefit of the economy goes to workers as opposed to capital holders, which effectively means companies and the people and institutions who own them. It helps to understand if more economic output will actually lead to better living conditions for workers. A decreasing labor share of GDP means more inequality because there is less economic benefit going to the workers the lower the percentage gets. For example, from 2014 to 2019, the labor share fell from 54.1% to 52.6%, which means that in 2014, 54.1% of the benefit was going to workers, and in 2019, only 52.6% was. The second technical measure of inequality is called the Gini index. I can feel all my international development nerds or ears perking up right now. It is a commonly used measure of inequality that shows the statistical dispersion in distribution of income over a population. A Gini index of 0 expresses perfect equality. That is, that every individual in the population has the exact same outcome. A Gini index of 100 expresses that all income accrues to one single individual and that all other individuals have zero income. Now, of course, neither of those scenarios is possible or desirable, but it helps to see the structure of inequality in a given country. So before we get into how we're performing right now, I want to remind you that the labor share of GDP and the Gini coefficient have opposite correlations. So a low Gini coefficient means less inequality, whereas a low labor share actually means more inequality. Okay, so let's get into the trends and the current standing. Globally, labor share of GDP is declining, which, remember, is a bad thing. But it's actually quite a complex picture if we zoom in. Europe and North America make up a large percentage of overall global income, and their labor shares have been declining, which is skewing the global statistical trends. There are actually several regions where labor share is improving, including Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Eastern and Southeastern Asia. However, even though these regions are improving, they're starting from quite a low number. And Europe and North America still have higher overall labor share than these regions, even if the trend is in decline. It's a little confusing, so I'm going to pop up a graphic so you can understand what I mean. On the Gini index levels of income, inequality remains high in many countries. Out of 166 countries with data, 65 have a Gini index value of over 40, with 17 having an index value greater than 50. The lowest levels of income inequality were seen in Slovenia and Czech Republic with a Gini coefficient of 25. Target 10.5. Improve the regulation and monitoring of the global financial markets and institutions and strengthen the implementation of such regulations. Okay, this one is also pretty technical, and frankly, it's kind of boring, so I'm going to do my best to explain this quickly and at a high level. The idea here is that we want a strong and sound financial system because if there are large vulnerabilities, it could cause big shocks like the 2008 financial crisis. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, has come up with a list of financial soundness indicators that show strengths and vulnerabilities in a country's financial system. While there are over 50 indicators looked at by the IMF, only 7 are considered here in Target 10.5. I'm going to list those indicators now, but I have full definitions in the blog post if that's of interest to you. So the financial soundness indicators are regulatory Tier 1 capital to assets, regulatory Tier 1 capital to risk-weighted assets, non-performing loans net of provisions to capital, non-performing loans to gross loans, return on assets, liquid assets to short-term liabilities, and net open position in foreign exchange to capital. Now that probably sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but taken together, these measures provide a good sense of how strong financial institutions are in a given country. Generally, since 2008, a number of reforms to the financial system globally have strengthened its ability to respond to shocks. Banks' profitability weakened in 2020 mostly because of COVID-19, although reported asset quality remained quite good. Despite a few worrying cases like SVB in the US and Credit Suisse in Switzerland, generally financial systems are performing pretty well with most of the soundness indicators remaining stable and improving slightly year over year. Target 10.6. Ensure enhanced representation and voice for developing countries in decision-making in global, international economic and financial institutions in order to deliver more effective, credible, accountable, and legitimate institutions. This one is another one that I think is pretty self-explanatory. It advocates for a stronger voice for developing countries in the decision bodies of international organizations, with the idea being that developing countries are best placed to make the case for the policies and decisions that will benefit them. The indicator has two separate components: the developing country proportion of voting rights and the developing country proportion of membership in international organizations. In some institutions, these two components are totally identical. The indicator is calculated independently for 11 different international institutions: the UN General Assembly, the UN Security Council, the United Nations Economic and Social Council, the International Monetary Fund, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Finance Corporation, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the Financial Stability Board. The proportion of the developing countries present in these institutions has remained pretty much unchanged since 2000. The UN Security Council has the largest percentage at 6.67%. Of course, this is because it's the smallest body. And the lowest percentage is the UN General Assembly, which has 0.518%, and that's because it has full representation of all the countries of the world. I'll link to an interactive chart in the blog post if you want to play with the data a little bit further. Target 10.7, facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. Labor, mobility, and migration are realities in today's world, but it can often be very difficult for migrants to integrate into society due to a variety of reasons and barriers. A migrant is a person who moves away from his or her place of usual residence, whether that's within a country or across an international border, temporarily or permanently, and for a variety of reasons. I want to be clear that this includes people who move for opportunity, as well as those who are forced to move to escape a dangerous situation, which we refer to as refugees. This target is measured by 4 indicators. 1 looks at the recruitment cost that an employee must pay to get hired. This is addressing the problem that low-skilled labor migrants often pay huge fees to obtain contracts and complete recruitment formalities. This is against international conventions that require that employers pay all the costs associated with recruitment of foreign workers. The second indicator is the number of countries with migration policies that facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people. The third indicator is the number of people who died or disappeared in the process of migration towards an international destination. This one is really tough to think about, but the reality is thousands of people put themselves at risk to move away from danger or towards greater opportunity. The fourth indicator is the proportion of the population who are refugees by country of origin. So let's look at where we stand on each of these indicators. For the indicator related to recruitment cost, collection of data on this has only recently begun and therefore is not solid enough to report at a global level. But a spotlight was shone on this issue during the World Cup this year when information was released about Qatar's practices in hiring foreign labor, which are also common practices in other countries in the Middle East. Many workers pay between 1 to 9 months of their earnings to pay for their own recruitment costs. For the indicator related to policies, globally 54% of countries have a comprehensive set of policies to facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people. For the indicator related to migrant deaths, in 2021, 5,895 people died fleeing their countries. This surpasses pre-pandemic figures and makes 2021 the deadliest year on record for migrants since 2017, according to the IOM. The majority of migration-related fatalities, or about 3,400, occurred on the maritime and land routes to and through Europe. For the indicator about the proportion of refugees, we see these numbers continue to climb. By mid-2021, the number of people forced to flee their countries due to war, conflict, persecution, human rights violations, and events seriously disturbing public order had grown to 24.5 million, the highest absolute number on record. For every 100,000 people worldwide, 311 are refugees outside their country of origin. This is a 44% rise since 2015. In absolute terms, countries in Northern Africa and Western Asia were the largest regional source of refugees, with approximately 8.4 million, followed by countries in Sub-Saharan Africa with 6.7 million and Latin America and the Caribbean with 4.5 million. The ongoing war in Ukraine has created the worst refugee crisis in recent history. As of May 2022, the movement of more than 6 million people from Ukraine to other countries has been registered, the majority of whom are women and children. In addition, at least 8 million people have been displaced inside the country to escape conflict. And before we close on this, I just want to restate the importance of the Leave No One Behind principle of the 2030 Agenda. We will not achieve sustainable development by having average progress. We need to include the most vulnerable and reach them first. Okay, so that's it for the main targets, but this goal has 3 means of implementation that focus on treatment of developing countries, aid, and foreign direct investment and remittances. So I'm going to quickly read those to you. Target 10.A, implement the principle of special and differential treatment for developing countries, in particular, least developed countries, in accordance with the World Trade Organization agreements. Target 10.B, encourage official development assistance and financial flows, including foreign direct investment, to states where the need is greatest, in particular, least developed countries, African countries, small island developing states, and landlocked developing countries, in accordance with their national plans and programs. Target 10C, by 2030, reduce to less than 3% the transaction costs of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. Okay, that's all I've got for you. Let's summarize and close this one out. SDG 10 focuses on reducing inequality within and between countries and is made up of 7 targets and 3 means of implementation. While wealth disparity between countries has been decreasing over the last 25 years, the disparity within countries has been on the rise, meaning that wealth is increasingly concentrated. Target 10.1 aims to achieve a higher rate of income growth among the bottom 40% of the population. There has been promising progress on this front, but initial data from the pandemic showed that it slowed or in some cases reversed progress. Target 10.2 focuses on inclusion as measured by the proportion of the population living on less than half of the national median income. Today, 13% of people globally fall into this category, but it can go up to as much as 25% in some countries. Target 10.3 encourages equal opportunity and freedom from discrimination. Today, roughly 1 in 5 people have experienced discrimination, and this is larger in groups like women and people with disabilities. Target 10.4 looks at policies that increase equality, and progress is quite a mixed bag on this target. Target 10.5 aims to achieve soundness and stability in the global financial system. This has been improving due to new safeguards since the 2008 financial crisis. Target 10.6 asks for more representation by developing countries in international decision-making, and representation of developing nations has been consistent, neither moving up or down since 2000. Target 10.7 aims to achieve orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people. Globally, 54% of countries have policies that support this goal. There are also 3 means of implementation targets focused on treatment of developing countries, aid, and foreign direct investment, and remittances. And that's SDG 10. And that's it. That's all I have for you. If you learned something in this video, give it a like. I'll be back very soon with SDG 11 on sustainable cities. And as always, don't forget to check out the blog post if you want more information or to continue learning about this topic. See you in the next one. And until then, keep fighting the good fight. Bye.